Hi everyone, this is the first video for section 7.1 on decimals. So I know that you've all seen decimals before, so there may be some things that I kind of overlook just because this is something that we all know. Okay, so when we think about decimals, I think that one of the most intuitive ways to think about it is to just think about it as extending the base 10 system in the opposite direction. So whenever we look here at this table, a decimal represents a fraction whose denominator is power of 10. So when we think about the base 10 system, remember that we have our ones place, our tens place, our hundreds place, and our thousands place that just correspond to the powers of 10, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But we can also extend it the opposite direction, where instead we now go to -1, -2, and -3. And we look at 10 raised to those negative powers. So if you remember, whenever we talked about exponents, when you raise a number to a negative exponent, it becomes a fraction. So just like before, our normal exponents go to 1,000, go to 1,000, 100, 10, and 1. And our negative exponents go to a fraction over those corresponding powers of 10. So 1 over 10, 1 over 100, and 1 over 1,000. And so now we can formalize this into decimals. So we had our base 10 system where we just had the exponents, then we can make them into fractions, and now we can make them into decimals where the thousands, hundreds, tens, ones all stay the same, but we convert these fractions into decimals. So this decimal is 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, representing the tenths, hundredths, and thousands. So you can hear the way I'm saying that is really emphasizing the TH, and you may want to do this as well if you're starting to talk about this concept with someone for the first time, is that our tens correspond to our tenths in the fact that, well, our tens are 10 to the 1. Our tens are 10 to the 1, and our tenths are 10 to the -1, which is the same thing as 10. And 1 over 10. And it's also the same thing as 10 and 0.1. So one way to kind of think about how to kind of have these things correspond is that, well, 10 has 1 0 and there's 1 decimal. 100 has 2 zeros and there's 2 places after the decimal. And likewise, 1,000 has 3 zeros and there's 3 places after the decimal, is how you can kind of relate these two concepts. Another thing on whenever we introduce this, relating it to fractions, is that the ways that we talk about these things can make them easier or harder for students to understand. So it may help to read the decimal the same way you would read a fraction. So for example, if we are reading this number right here, we would read it 3 and 576 hundredths. Ooh, that should be thousands. So this should actually be thousands. My apologies. So this is 576 thousandths. So you can read 3.576 the same way. So I just said it 3.576. Just because those are the digits that are there, right? This is exactly what's written, is 3, a decimal point, and then a 5, a 7, and 6. So we can read this number the same way whenever we're introducing these concepts. So we can read this as 3 and 576 thousandths, right? Where you would just read it the same way as reading the fraction to say that this 0.576 really does represent that fraction, 576 over 1,000. Okay, so we're just going to do a little quick review about how to write things as a decimal and a fraction. So this should be familiar to you. Like I said, there may be some things that I'm going to assume that you know just because we're in college. So if you struggle with any of these things, go back. There's examples in the book Specifically for these two examples, writing fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions, example 1 and 2 on page 247 have more examples of this. Okay, so we're going to write 2 3/100 as a decimal. So the way I said it is really indicative of how it's going to be written, right? So we read this as 2 and 300 THS. So this is 2 3/100. And so whenever we write that as a decimal, we have 2, and then the decimal place is where we say the and then 3/100. So 100 tells us that there's going to be 2 decimal places, and we just have 3 of those. So this is just going to be 2.03. And then this next example, we're going to write this as a fraction. So how many decimal places are there? Well, how many places after the decimal are there? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So remember, if we have 3 places after the decimal, that was our thousandths here. So this was 3 zeros, 3 places. So now we're going to have 4 zeros for 4 places. So this is going to be 4. And then instead of thousandths, this is going to be 10 thousandths. And this is because we have 4 places after the decimal. So we're going to have 10 thousandths, and we only have 4 of those. So this is going to be represented by 4 divided by 10,000. So 4 10,000ths. And that's just a little quick review on how to convert decimals to fractions and vice versa. And so next time we'll talk about how to use base blocks with decimals.